The Doppelganger. This is a true story that happened to me when I was around 11 years old. And this isn't even the scariest encounter that's happened to me, but it is the first time I've seen something like this with my own eyes. For some background, I've always lived in haunted houses ever since I was a child. But this Missouri house was completely different. Unlike my previous house in California, where I only heard creepy things, like footsteps going up the stairs, in the attic, and toys going off by themselves, and voices, as well as seeing things move on their own, I've never seen anything like this until I moved to rural Missouri. It was in the middle of the day. My best friend Jillian and I were hanging out inside my clubhouse that my parents built for me in the backyard. There was a lower and an upper deck. The lower deck was smaller, and it had wooden window shutters that you could open from the inside or the outside of the clubhouse. While we were in the lower deck, playing on our 3DSs, Jillian told me that she had to run over to feed her cats real quick, and she just lived next door. So basically, I told her to do her thing and I'd be waiting inside the clubhouse. About 3 minutes later, Jillian comes rushing over to the window shutters, opening them from the outside suddenly and frantically. I looked over at her and I asked her what she was doing, but there was no response. She just stared at me, blankly. Not to mention her face was completely gray. I thought she smeared Halloween makeup on her face or something, so I just told her to get in here. She then slams the shutters closed, and I saw through the cracks of the wood her run off behind the clubhouse without a word. I was confused. I wasn't sure if she was playing a prank on me or what, but it didn't raise any alarms for me at the time. I opened the front door to the clubhouse just to peek around to see where she went, but she was nowhere in sight. I then look over to her house next door to see her just now leaving her front door. No gray face paint, just her normal looking self. After seeing that, it shook me to my core. I was too scared to be at my clubhouse anymore, so I ended up hanging out at her house instead for the rest of the day. Who did I see? And what did I see? It happened again, and I'm scared now. A while back, I made a post talking about experiences that I've had since childhood that seemed to defy explanation, and other Reddit users suggested that I was experiencing epileptic seizures. I've gone to the doctor, and they weren't able to find anything wrong with my brain, and my blood work came back normal. They noted that the incidents went way too far back in incident frequency to be epileptic seizures. We don't know what's going on. But about 2 months back, something terrifying happened. I've never had such an intense and real incident. I remember so much of it this time too. And even now, before I've even explained what happened, I'm starting to sob and get goosebumps, but I don't really know why. I've never had such an intense response. I know this will sound crazy, but here it goes. I was sitting on my couch after a nap one early morning while home with a relative of mine and my dogs. It was my day off. All of a sudden, I felt a very weird shift in the room. Something felt off. This was my house, but there was still something uncanny about it. As I looked into the kitchen area that leads to the master bedroom, I noticed it get longer, kind of like that scene in The Matrix with the blank room and the dude began to shift. It became much larger than normal, and all around me the colors started to become muted. Eventually, I noticed the furniture in the house began pointing toward the door. The legs of the chair, the couch arm area, the cabinet doors in the kitchen, even the lamp all began pointing to the door. I began to get scared, so I called out to my cousin in the other room to come out. I waited for a few moments and repeatedly raised my voice each time and called out to him again. But I got nothing. I was screaming bloody murder so hard that my voice began to hurt. I still got no response. He had to have heard me. The walls here are thin. I did the same for my pets too, and I got the same results. I began to freak out. I called my mother at her work and I told her that something was wrong, and it was her voice. I felt relieved for a moment, thinking I must just be having some weird, hallucinogenic break from reality. But what my mother said scared the crap out of me. She asked if I did all I could do to figure out what was going on, and I told her yes, but then she replied, "Have you tried opening the door?" I hadn't mentioned the door to her, and my spine shivered. I got shaky and scared, and another voice came into the phone, but it was that error message voice that you get when a call doesn't go through. All she kept saying was, "Open the door." I began to sob loudly. I hid under the covers, and I kept shouting, "This isn't real. This isn't real. This can't be real." Then I heard voices and sounds of machinery. I was so freaked out, I called the emergency number. I was so scared. I was hoping that if the cops showed up, it would be a sign that this was all in my head. Maybe they could take me to a hospital. I called, and the first thing the operator said was, "You should try opening the door. Look what's inside." And then I heard this mocking laugh, and I threw my phone against the wall and I hid underneath the covers once again. Many memories start to flood back now. I'm in a white, sterile room. Something's being done to me. I only catch brief glimpses from what I remember, but honestly, I don't want to remember. I began cycling through my life again, as if I were physically there, back at certain points of my life. And all I could do was rock myself back and forth until I fell asleep. When I woke up, everything was back to normal. My phone showed no calls to the cops or to my mother, but I know I made those calls. Now, telling you this story, I've begun to sob in fear and I'm getting goosebumps just retelling it. Please, someone tell me they've been through something similar. I'm so scared. I don't understand what's happening and why it was so vivid this time. The only other time something this real happened was in kindergarten, when I launched myself from the swing set and I got stuck in the air for around 2 minutes while the world around me froze. Other strange occurrences include me being pulled up in the middle of the night by what I can only call my soul. I would begin to feel rapid spinning and a very scary feeling, and I was on top of my sleeping self. I could go anywhere in real time instantly, and it felt so real. I'm not religious, and I don't believe in ghosts or spirits, but this scares me because I can't explain it. Did I see a Vardoger? Yesterday, something really strange happened to my mom and my sister, and I don't know if it was a coincidence or an actual glitch in the Matrix. I was at work between 1 and 2 p.m. when my mom texted me that she was going to have lunch with my sister. We chatted back and forth until she stopped replying. Later that afternoon, when I got home, she told me the weirdest thing. She said I was in her bedroom. Now, for some context, our apartment is laid out like this. When you enter, there's the living room and the dining room, then a hallway with the kitchen, my bedroom, and my sister's empty bedroom, and then finally at the end is my mom's bedroom. From her room, you can only see the hallway. While she was in her room, she clearly heard my sister come in. She heard the front door opening, the keys jingling, the sound of her purse and jacket being dropped onto the chair next to the door. Even the cats sleeping on my mom's bed woke up and ran out to greet her like they always do. But nobody ever walked down the hallway. My mom eventually gets up to greet her, but there was nobody there. Later, my sister told us her side of the story. Around noon, she had texted my mom about having lunch together. She left her phone on the bed while she went to shower and get ready, and when she came out, the phone was gone. She tore her entire place apart looking for it. She moved the bed, she stripped the sheets, and checked every single corner. She even used Find My iPhone, but it only showed it somewhere in her apartment. She got so frustrated, she called her boyfriend on Discord from her PC to ask if maybe he'd accidentally taken it, but he hadn't. After about an hour of crying, she checked her room one more time. And there it was. The phone was now lying right in the middle of her bed, completely in plain sight, as if it had been there the whole time. When my mom told me about the door and the keys and the cats running to greet someone who wasn't there, and then my sister told me about the phone disappearing and reappearing, I joked that maybe the parallel universe version of my sister didn't lose her phone, managed to leave on time, and actually came home for lunch. Jokes aside, it's still a bit unsettling. What do you guys think? Was this a glitch in the Matrix? I didn't know dreams could work this way. As if this timeline could be any weirder, last night, my husband and I had the exact same dream. I was the one who posted on here about coming home to a missing step on our front door a couple of weeks ago. We had a blowout wedding at our house. We had so many incredible and uncanny synchronicities on our wedding day too, and through the honeymoon. For example, we discovered there was an underground hornet's nest right where our altar was supposed to be. As our coordinator team was setting up the altar and the chairs, the hive swarmed, and we immediately had to shift gears and move the entire ceremony across the property. It ended up being a much better location all around, though, and I didn't even think of it. I can only imagine what would have happened if the hive swarmed during our wedding. Anyway, last night, I had this dream that it was our wedding at an estate at a 2-story home. Our vendors were all so disorganized and late that we missed the wedding. We had to tell everyone that we were going to try again tomorrow. But unfortunately, the same thing happened again, and everyone just had to go home. I didn't think anything of it, as I usually remember all of my dreams. And then, in the kitchen, with my now husband, who never remembers his dreams, says, "Oh, by the way, I had the strangest dream last night that we missed our wedding." He then goes on to describe how we had a wedding at this 2-story estate, and he was trying to get ready, but all of the vendors were late and disorganized, and we missed the wedding. We then attempted to have another one the next day, but the same thing happened, exactly like what I had dreamed. Any takers on how to process all of this? I think it definitely points to some sort of merging or consciousness or timelines post-wedding. A A strange encounter on a lonely road. A few years ago, I had a strange and unsettling experience that I still can't fully explain. It was late at night, and I was driving home from a friend's house in this rural area. The road was completely deserted, with no other cars or houses in sight. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young girl, maybe around 10 years old, wearing this white dress that looked strangely out of place. She had long, dark hair that covered most of her face. I started to slow down, concerned that she might be lost or in trouble. I rolled down my window and I called out to her, asking if she needed help. She didn't respond, but she slowly lifted her head, revealing this pair of pitch-black eyes that seemed just to absorb all of the light coming from my headlights. A chill runs down my spine, and every instinct tells me to get away as quickly as possible. So I speed off. My heart is pounding, and I don't look back. When I finally reach home, I tell my family about the encounter, but they just dismiss it as like a trick of the light or something, or my imagination running wild. However, a few weeks later, I start to hear similar stories from other locals about seeing a girl with black eyes on that same stretch of road. To this day, I avoid that road at night, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that night wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I mean, the memory still haunts me today, even as I type this out, and I can't help but wonder who or what that girl was. Do you think she came from another dimension? Do you think she was a warning? Was she a ghost? I suppose it wasn't my time to go yet. Okay, so this was about 6-ish years ago. I was driving this crappy little Honda Civic that I had at the time to meet with some friends to camp for a night on the full moon. I took a, quote, shortcut that was basically a 2-lane road through the Shenandoah Mountains that connected 2 different highways. Mount Weather is up there about halfway through. It's not really relevant, but it is an interesting tidbit as there are so many conspiracy theories about that specific place. Anyway, I had taken this route countless times before. Now, the fog gets dense up there when it rains, and it happened to be raining right before dusk. I could barely see a foot in front of me. I accidentally took one downhill curve a little too fast on the slick road with iffy tires, and I overcorrected. I ended up swerving basically a 180, and I came to a stop facing the opposite direction on the other side of the road, in a patch of gravel to the side of the pavement, just big enough for my car to land in. I don't really know how this happened so perfectly, given the fact that I lost control. Instead of driving off the cliff onto the side, or crashing into a car coming the opposite way, which would have been more likely to happen at the time, I just landed perfectly, and I drove off with not so much as a scratch on myself or my car, just a couple of brambles and leaves stuck under the front. The weird part about this, to me, was the fact that I never saw that patch of gravel again. I drove down that road another countless amount of times after the fact, and I knew exactly what curve this had happened at. There was never a sign of any space on the side of the road there. I looked for it every time I passed, but to no avail. I'm sure this was just a matter of luck, and maybe a bit of confusion. At least that's what logic wants me to think. but I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to walk away unscathed or even alive, or in that, in some other universe, I wasn't so lucky. Quack, quack. When I was 18, I lived with my sister and her boyfriend. I stayed in her illegal bedroom in the basement that had no windows, just a box room. It was the best we could do at the time. I came home from a night out with friends. The house was empty for the weekend, so I was alone. I admit, at the time I was very unhealthy, so there was tons of garbage and wrappers all over my floor from just binge eating. I like to keep my room locked so nobody would see it. That night, I came home to the empty house. I went to bed, locked the door, and I laid down. The next morning, I hear my sister calling me as she came home and woke up as she came to my room and opened the door. Now, I thought that was extremely weird since I remember locking that door before I laid down. She turned the light on to wake me up and to talk to me about something. Then she looked at the mess on the ground and saw a living, breathing duck at the foot of my bed. Hilarious at first, she thought I must have been super drunk or something and did something stupid. But nope, I was dead sober. To this day, I have no idea how that duck got in a room with no windows and the door locked from the inside. We ended up bringing it outside, and 12 years later, my sister still remembers the story as clear as day, and I thought for the longest time that I was just remembering it wrong or making it up in my head. I didn't know who that was. First of all, sorry for my writing. My English isn't very good, so I used a translator to help me. This happened to me a few days ago, and I can't get it out of my head because of how strange it was. I was watching a movie, and I needed to go to the bathroom. I took the chance to splash some water on my face, and in that moment, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I kind of saw myself outside of my own body. It all happened very fast, like 10 seconds. Now, while I was looking at myself in the mirror, it was as if my face suddenly zoomed in, and I was looking at myself again from outside of my body, watching myself in the mirror. I don't know if that makes sense. And when I was looking at myself, I didn't recognize myself. It was so crazy. I didn't know who I was. It felt like I was just staring at a stranger. Then, I snapped out of this trance feeling really weird. I remember how it felt and what I experienced, and I can't stop thinking about it. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before or since, but I just had to share it and ask, has anything like this ever happened to you? We have somebody that's helpful. In the comments, they say, some people believe that our consciousness does not originate inside our bodies, but instead it's more like a sort of signal that our bodies receive from somewhere else. If that's the case, then perhaps you momentarily received somebody else's signal. The other, probably simpler explanation is that you had an out-of-body experience, but still, that wouldn't explain why you didn't recognize yourself. I've never heard of somebody leaving their body and not recognizing it. OP responds and adds, yes, that was the strangest part for me. I didn't recognize me. It even made me feel bad afterwards. I got a strange message about a silver owl, and then something impossible happened. I don't usually post stuff like this, but something happened recently that I can't shake off. It felt like a glitch or some kind of message from something. I've been apartment hunting for a while now. A few days ago, completely out of the blue, I got a strange message on my phone, and I'm not even sure how or from where, but it basically said, "If the silver owl shows up again, it's a sign. Look for it." And that line stuck with me. Silver owl. I even took a screenshot because it felt so weird and oddly specific. Well, fast forward to yesterday. I went to view an apartment that looked great on paper. When I stepped out onto the balcony, I was taking in the view. There were a ton of trees and lots of nature just to look at. But then I glanced down at the balcony across from mine, and there it was. A silver owl statue. Just sitting there, looking right at me. It hit me instantly. That's the owl. That's the one from the message. It was like the universe was confirming that this was the place for me. Now, out of curiosity, I looked up the street name, and the street is named after a man who was a wealthy bank director. He never married, and get this, he donated his entire fortune to support young Christian women. And here's where it gets really weird. My mother's grandfather actually lived on the same street back when he was alive. And now, completely separately, my daughter has also moved to that same street. That's 3 generations of my family. My ancestor, my daughter, and now me, all end up connected to this one street. And I only noticed because of some mysterious silver owl message on my phone. Coincidence? Fate? Or a glitch in the Matrix? I can't really tell you. But it felt like the whole situation just lined up a little too perfectly to be random. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Where a weirdly specific sign led you exactly to where you were supposed to be? Weird nose piercing glitch. I got my nose pierced with a piercing gun about 6 weeks ago. And yes, I know, don't come at me. It's healing up fine. Anyway, the piercing comes out real easily because it has no back on it. I was in the shower a couple of weeks ago, and I wasn't being careful enough when I was washing my face, and I feel my nose piercing come out of my nose. I then watch it fall to the shower floor, and before I can even react, I watch it go down the drain. Sad face. I quickly turn off the water, and I try to get the stud, but it's no use. It's gone. So I make a dash to the store to get a new one to put in my nose before that hole closes up. Well, fast forward 2 weeks to today, and I'm lying in bed, and I feel something sharp digging into my hip. It's the nose piercing that I watched go down the drain. I now have 2 nose piercings, one that's in my nose now, and this other one that's in my leg. I live alone, and I've changed my bedding 2 times since this happened, and I cannot work out for the life of me how that piece of jewelry that I watched go down my shower drain ended up in my bed. Glitch in a Ross. Okay, so I know this will sound like I just did it to myself, but I have to tell you anyway. Back in September of 2021, I had just started working with a girlfriend from high school. We were both 20 years old. She had just gotten her nails done. They were acrylics, and this is important, it will come up again. They were a cute white and black cow print that the nail tech physically painted on. I was moving, and I wanted to do some window shopping with my girlfriend, and then she said she'd come with me to Ross. We're walking around and chatting, and I step on something that made a crunch noise. At first, I was like, what the F, man? Then I look down, and there's a plastic nail that you can glue on the floor, face down, so I can't see the print. I looked at my girlfriend for a minute because this wasn't the first time I've had a nail matrix happen. And I tell her, I swear to God, if I flip this nail and it's your pattern, I'm gonna start tripping. Well, I bend down, I flip over that nail, and it's the exact same cow print pattern that's on her nails. We double-checked all of her nails to make sure that all 10 were still there, and they were. I literally could not believe it. She was clearly wearing acrylics, and this one was not acrylic, admittedly, but it was the exact same hand-painted pattern. I still think about this to this day. And no, we weren't under the influence of anything. Just two girls shopping at a store. Good glitch. I stumbled across this sub the other day, and I just started reading through the stories, thinking not much of it, until I recalled something weird that happened to me a while ago. It's nothing as crazy as some of the posts on here, but it really bugged me and my friend. So basically, me and my friend B were in our last year of high school, and that day our teacher hadn't come to class, so we were just hanging outside. There were these tables made of concrete, so I decided to take a nap there. You know, when you just lay your head on your arms. But I forgot my glasses were in my shirt pocket, so when I woke up, they were totally messed up. Like the lenses were dragged across the concrete while I was napping. I recall freaking out because these were very expensive glasses. My friend saw them too and was just messing with me because he knew my mom would end me. Needless to say, I didn't tell my mom, and I just went on with my life with crappy vision and scratched glasses. But here's the thing. I don't know how long after it happened, but one day I was messing with my glasses and I noticed there were no scratches. All of a sudden, they looked brand new. So I FaceTimed my friend, and he agreed with me that the glasses have been indeed effed up before, and he was kind of freaked out now when I showed him how they looked now. I know it isn't as weird as the other stories on this subreddit, but I just wanted to share. How did my glasses go from being in my pocket, rubbing against the concrete table that I was napping on, to just shortly after that, looking brand new? At least my mom didn't, end me over having to buy new glasses, so, hey, good glitch, I guess. Something unexplainable happened on the way to school. A few years ago, when I was in college, something strange happened that I still can't make sense of. I lived about an hour away from campus, so I stayed in the dorms during the week, and I drove home on the weekends. The drive was pretty simple. It's just one long road with a couple of roundabouts that everyone at my school used to joke about. It felt like they were always adding new roundabouts, but it took the city forever to finish anything. Construction would drag on for months, sometimes years before a single road change was done. At the time, there were 2 roundabouts on the route that I took home. One was right off the highway, and another was a little closer to my school. That was it. I drove that road so often, I could have done it blindfolded. That Friday afternoon, I left campus, I drove through the 2 roundabouts, and I made it home without a hitch. I stayed until Sunday evening, as usual. But on the drive back to school that night, something was off. I exited the highway and I hit the first roundabout, normal. And then, only a short distance later, I came upon another roundabout. A brand new, completely finished roundabout that I had never seen before. It didn't make any sense. There was supposed to be a decent stretch of road before the second one, but here I was, driving through a brand new one that had just appeared. The asphalt was smooth. The lines were freshly painted. The streetlights were already installed and working. Now, at first, I thought that I had just gotten mixed up or something, or taken a different route by accident. But a few minutes later, I came to what I knew was the original second roundabout, exactly where it should have been. So now there are 3 roundabouts on my way home. I remember feeling my stomach drop. I had this wave of nausea that was just hitting me as I realized how impossible that was. I knew this road. I drove it every single week. There was never any construction, no signs of work ever being done, and no detour warnings either. Yet somehow, a fully finished roundabout had appeared over a single weekend. I told my friends about it later. Most of them swore that there were only ever 2. Nobody remembered this third one. So, either a construction crew managed to plan, pave, and complete an entire roundabout in under 48 hours, something that would normally take them 6 months in my town, or I slipped into some alternate version of the drive that I'd always known. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that maybe I really did experience a glitch in the Matrix. You and I, let's build a time machine and go all the way back to 1995. A mysterious caller dials into Art Bell's late-night radio show, Coast to Coast AM. The caller introduces himself as Mike Madman Markham. He claimed that he had built a working backyard time machine. He said that he sent up to 200 small items and even some small animals through it. And he even said that he planned to travel through it himself after building a bigger one. What sounds like science fiction would actually land this dude in jail. But what happened after that? Well, he vanished. Markham was a man from Stanberry/King City, Missouri. He told Bell that his time travel device was based on a Jacob's Ladder concept. It's a high-voltage arc between 2 metal rods. He claimed to have modified it using lasers and transformers to generate a field that could distort time and space. Now, during Mike's first call, he described a test run in which he claimed something bizarre happened. He says he threw a sheet metal screw into the field over the ladder. According to his account, the screw disappeared, only to reappear on the ground just a few feet away. He said that's what gave him the confidence that the device produced a temporal or a spatial effect. He also admitted that in order to power this larger version, He had stolen several power transformers from St. Louis Light and Power in King City, Missouri. Those thefts triggered blackouts in that area and drew the attention of authorities. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 60 days in jail, plus a suspended sentence. During that first appearance, he insisted that the stolen parts were absolutely necessary to scale up his experimental time machine. But he told Bell that he was certain that one day it would work. He also claimed to have already sent around 200 objects and small animals through this prototype. Markham returned to the radio waves a year later in 1996. By then, he claimed he was building a more robust and legal version, using parts that he had acquired, quote, legitimately. He said it was about 30 days away from completion, and he again announced plans to travel through it himself. But shortly after that, he goes silent. 1 year later, 1997, after his second radio appearance, Markham ceased contacting radio shows entirely. By January of 97, he had disappeared. Mike Madman Markham had no confirmed sightings. There were no news reports that were tracking him. He actually became a subject of speculation and conspiracy. People started to wonder, did he succeed? Did he actually make it into his time machine? Or was he being silenced? In 2015, what's the math on that? 18 years later, Markham reappears again via radio. On Midnight in the Desert, which was another one of Art Bell's later programs, Markham claimed he had in fact been transported 2 years into the future and 800 miles away, landing somewhere near Fairfield, Ohio. He said he suffered amnesia at first. Living in a homeless shelter, he gradually recovered his identity. He started to remember his social security number, his past memories, and who he was entirely, and he slowly re-entered society. However, skeptics highlight one glaring issue. The Missouri State Highway Patrol has no record of him ever being reported as a missing person during those years. Parts of Markham's story, they actually match verifiable records. The theft of the Transformers, the arrest, the sentencing, his multiple radio interviews. However, other parts, the successful time travel, the disappearance into the void, his amnesia, and so on, those aspects rest entirely on his claims, unsubstantiated by any contemporaneous documents. There were never any police reports or hospital records, and unfortunately no third-party confirmations exist that prove he time traveled or vanished through time. Online, Markham's story has become a bit of a modern myth. Reddit threads debate pretty feverishly whether he's a sincere inventor or a hoax or just some delusional guy, from the South. One commenter wrote, "He stole Transformers and caused blackouts and then disappeared. He either found a door in time or he just got tired and burned out." Others point to missing records as proof that much of the story here is exaggerated, right? The fact that there were no missing persons reports or anything like that. You'd figure his friends or family would report him as missing after not seeing him for a while. Some suggest that he's part of some tradition of time travel hoaxes, these public claims that pop up every now and then with no hard evidence. Take it for what it's worth, that pattern is common among sighting legends and strange devices. I figure we've all seen the video of that lady walking through the Charlie Chaplin film on her cell phone. That's where the trail goes cold, though. After his 1996 call, Mike Markham vanished. Then, nearly 2 decades later, he pops back onto the airwaves claiming that he skipped forward 2 years and landed almost 1,000 miles away from when he jumped into his machine with, again, allegedly no memory of who he was. Maybe the real story here is how time isn't simply fixed. This man was driven so far by curiosity, he built a DIY home time travel machine that either failed spectacularly or worked just well enough to swallow him for a while. Thank you for joining me on this No Way Files segment. The next ones are going to be just as mysterious and just as unexplainable. My bracelet is different now, and it's freaking me out. Hi all. I'm not sure if this really fits here, but I just need to get it off my chest. The story starts with a bracelet. It's a silver cuff bracelet. It's pretty simple, smooth, and it's engraved with 3 small words at the very center. It reads, "She is free." When I bought it at a women's conference back in January, there were no other markings anywhere on it. The inside of the band was also completely blank. I loved it. But by mid-February, it was gone. I looked everywhere. I looked in all my bags, my drawers, the floor of my room, the laundry. Nothing. Eventually, I assumed it was just lost for good. Then, not long ago, I found it again. It was sitting in the front seat of a car, and not even my car, a car that I don't even drive, but one that I've been restoring on and off for a while. But here's the strange part. I never took that car to the conference. I never had the bracelet anywhere near it. There's no reason that it should have been there at all. When I picked it up, I noticed something even weirder. It wasn't just my bracelet anymore. My nickname was engraved on one side of the band, and on the other side, the date, February 17, was etched into the metal. There was no year included, and there was no context at all. It was just the date. Now, I stood there, flabbergasted, trying to make sense of how an object that I lost, one that had been plain and unmarked, how it could reappear months later, altered, in a place that it had never been. That date, February 17, it doesn't mean anything specific to me, but it's always been one that I liked for some reason. I've always just felt drawn to the number 17, and I've always felt connected to February. I know it probably sounds, small or silly compared to some of the other stories here, but this one really unsettles me. The bracelet I lost and the bracelet I found aren't the same one, but yet they are. I don't know. I just needed to tell somebody about it. I saw reality tear. This one is strange, and it just happened yesterday. We were doing a concrete pour that morning, and halfway through the job, I noticed something odd. My right sleeve was ripped. Now, I already had a small tear on the left sleeve, so I remember thinking, oh great, now both sides are trashed. Thing is though, I couldn't remember the moment that it happened. I didn't feel it tear. I didn't hear any fabric rip. I just looked down and there it was. This clean, triangular tear flapping in the breeze, big enough that I could clearly see my skin underneath. I assumed I'd caught it on a screw sticking out of one of the plywood forms or something. I mean, Pouring concrete gets chaotic, so I didn't really think much of it. I finished the job, I went home, and I even remember being careful not to rip it any further while taking it off that night. And then I forgot about it. The next morning, I pulled the same shirt off of the chair where I'd tossed it, and I froze. The tear on the right sleeve was gone. And of course, there were no stitch marks, no sign that it had ever even been there in the first place. The sleeve was just clean and unbroken now. I stood there, desperately trying to figure out how that actually happened. I just wanted to make sense of how a rip that I'd seen and touched and worked around all day could just completely heal itself overnight. To make it weirder, when I looked at my arm, there were 3 distinct concrete burns exactly where my skin had been exposed. Just faint marks forming the same triangular shape as the missing tear. I even tried putting the shirt on backwards to see if maybe I'd made some dumb mistake or something, but that didn't work. The fit was instantly uncomfortable, and the spot didn't even line up with the burns. So now, I'm stuck with this. I clearly remember the tear. I remember the skin showing, and I have the burns on my arm to prove it. But the shirt sleeve? It's flawless. I've been thinking about this pretty much all day, running through every possible explanation, and I keep coming up empty. At this point, the only thing that makes sense is that it doesn't. How can 2 people see the same glitch? It was about 3 p.m. this afternoon. It was bright, sunny, and perfectly clear. I was sitting in the living room. Every blind in the house was open to let the light in. And then, just for a split second, everything went dark. It was like the power had gone out and then come back on instantly. The light outside vanished. It was pitch black for just the briefest moment, and then it was sunny again, as if nothing happened. I started to say something to my husband, something about the lights flickering, but I stopped myself mid-sentence. None of our lights were even on. It was daytime after all, and we were letting the natural light in. I thought maybe that I had just blinked weirdly, or I had just imagined it. So I said, never mind. But my husband looked up and said, "What? Were you about to ask about the light flickering outside?" He'd seen it too. It hadn't been my imagination. It was like someone had switched off the sun for half a second. I just wanted to make sense of what we had both seen. I wanted to find any logical or physical reason why daylight itself could flicker like that. It had happened too fast for it to be a passing cloud, and there weren't any large trees or objects nearby that could have cast a sudden shadow. I mean, a plane? Maybe, but that would have been too far away to black out everything so completely. A few minutes later, my husband, who'd gone to another room to look out the window, said that he saw birds circling frantically above the neighborhood. Now, whether that was connected or just a coincidence, I couldn't say. Neither of us have any health issues. We weren't dizzy, we have no vision problems, and we were both completely alert, and we saw the same thing at the same time. It's been stuck in my head ever since. What could make a sunny afternoon look like someone flipped the lights off on the entire world just for a split second? Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? my cat did something crazy. It's super late right now, and I can't sleep. I noticed that my cat wasn't in bed with me, which is unusual. She always curls up right beside me at night. I got up to look for her before settling in again, but I just could not find her. My apartment is tiny, and I don't have much furniture right now, and so there aren't many places to hide. I checked everywhere. Every cabinet, every weird nook and cranny that I could think of, but nothing. I started worrying that maybe she slipped out when I left the apartment about 40 minutes earlier, but I definitely would have noticed her running past me. I shook the treat bag, I called out her name, I looked under all the blankets and the pillows, and I tore my entire bed apart. Nothing. At this point, I'm very panicked. I just want to find my cat. I thought maybe she was outside on my front door in the hallway, but when I checked, no cat. Then, suddenly, she was just there, sitting perfectly still in the bathroom. She looked half asleep, blinking at me like nothing had happened. But the problem here was that there was nowhere for her to hide in that bathroom. The cabinets are sealed tight, and they slam loudly when you open or close them. And it already checked in there 3 separate times anyway, along with the closet right next to it. The apartment is so small, there's no way that she could have slipped past me without me seeing her or hearing her. But yet, she just appeared. She let me pick her up for a moment before immediately wriggling free and running off to eat the treats that I'd left out. I stood there, staring at the bathroom, completely bewildered. This whole thing lasted maybe 10 minutes, and there was no alcohol or drugs, nothing to mess with my perception. It was just me, wide awake, trying to figure out how my cat managed to vanish into thin air and then reappear out of nowhere. Montrose Cemetery. We used to run a small paranormal research group, just a few of us, chasing stories of haunted places around South Carolina. One night, we heard about an old abandoned graveyard in Mechanicsville, perched high on a hill overlooking the PD River. The place had belonged to a church that burned down decades ago before being relocated. All that remained were the graves. Most were sunken deep into the ground, their stones broken or, missing entirely. In the middle stood a large, newer group marker listing the names of the people that were buried there, sort of a way to honor the forgotten. Locals said that the site was haunted by 2 things: the spirit of a young child dressed in antebellum clothing, and a dark shadow with glowing red eyes. Some sort of remnant of a murderer who, according to legend, brought his victims to that very hill because it was so remote. Naturally, we had to see it for ourselves. When we arrived, the first thing we noticed was the darkness, just the total, heavy blackness. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The forest around the cemetery was so overgrown that it swallowed every trace of starlight and moonlight. Even our flashlights barely could cut through it. My friend's girlfriend refused to leave the car, so she stayed back. And honestly, after what happened, I can't blame her. As soon as we stepped through the gate, we felt the temperature drop. It had been 85 degrees outside, humid and sticky, but inside the graveyard, it was freezing. My thermometer read 62. Our goal that night was to document proof, anything that might confirm the stories. Anything from EVPs to temp readings, visual evidence, or even photos of some sort of anomaly. But what we got instead was something much stronger. Something that wanted us gone. The deeper we went in, the more oppressive it became. The air felt thick and heavy, as if it was pressing right up against us. One of us said it felt like walking through wet cement. Someone else said that the ground felt like marshmallows gripping our shoes. And then we heard it. This rush of movement. It was fast and violent, and it was coming straight toward us. Out of the blackness, we saw it. We saw a shadow that was darker than the night itself, and it had those glowing red eyes. It grew larger as it approached us, and it was radiating this anger that just froze us where we stood. None of us could talk. I don't think any of us could even breathe. Then, as it surged closer, instinct took over. Everybody in our group bolted for the exit. It felt like the trees themselves were trying to stop us. The branches kept snagging our clothes. The twigs were, grabbing at our arms, like the forest didn't want to let us go. When we finally broke through the tree line, gasping, one of the cars wouldn't start. It was the battery. It was barely a few months old, but it was now completely drained. We called a tow truck, but the driver refused to come out until daylight. I was shocked. Even the tow driver said that place is evil at nighttime, and he wouldn't come out. When we checked our cameras later, we saw dozens of orbs floating in the frames. One picture showed moss hanging from a tree that looked disturbingly human-shaped, like a man swaying in the dark. And the EVPs, man, those were even worse. We caught audio of angry whispers. You couldn't tell what they were saying. They were unintelligible, but they sounded mad, like something still wanted to drive us away. That was the first and last time we ever visited that graveyard. 15 years later, I can still feel that cold when I think about it. Last year, in my pre-cal class, my friend tells me that he can make clouds disappear and says that he'll show me. Now, I don't feel like getting up, and I really don't care about that because it sounded ridiculous at the time. But he goes on to tell me his method, and he shows me some websites and some videos of other people doing it too. His method was to stare straight into a cloud with all focus on that cloud and nothing else. While staring into the cloud, you need to stare through it and start to see it dissipate in your head, all while chanting, "Cloud disappear, cloud disappear." Although, I don't know, I don't think the chanting is necessary. Anyway, we skip ahead about a week or so, and we're on the way to the beach with a few other friends from class. My cloud friend and I are in the back, and we're all pretty drunk, and I jokingly start testing what he had told me. And the first cloud that I tried it on, it worked. I did it repeatedly the whole way to the beach, making every cloud that I looked at disappear. Other people in the car started believing and trying it as well, and I've showed this to a few other people since then, and some laughed, obviously. I can't blame them. I haven't done it in a while because after doing it to a few clouds consistently, it feels like my mental energy is drained. This friend from my class changed my perception in a way. Like, we all have this sixth sense that we just don't know how to use. Anyway, I know the chanting part sounds ridiculous, but try it out. I think everyone should be open-minded before bashing this and just see for yourself. Start with the small, thin clouds, and then work your way up. This next one is more of a discussion that comes from somebody who's clearly going through it right now, but I think they might be onto something. I mostly just hope they're okay. I can't escape the simulation. Have you had any experiences that make you believe you're in a simulation? I've had the distinct experience that my conscious experience is a simulation. In sobriety, I entered into a sort of trance, a state of consciousness in which I was challenged to be aware of reality, suggesting that this is not the only reality, as is supported by theories of multiverses, quantum physics, string theory, and so forth. Unfortunately, I've come to believe that I live in a simulation, or at least that I live in only one version of many extant realities. I can't escape the version where my consciousness equals reality, because I can't get past that step where I have to become aware of my consciousness and tell myself this is reality. I don't know what the other option is. I mean, I can't tell myself that my conscious experience is not reality. I think that would be too mind-bending to comprehend. I keep hope by believing that this life, this simulation, is just a learning experience, and that when I die, I'll exit the sim and truly experience reality. Or at least something better than this life of suffering. This is my hope, because it's too depressing to think that my entire life is a simulation for no good reason. My experience with an altered state of consciousness and resulting ego disillusion leads me to believe that life does continue on somehow. Perhaps after death, you simply wake up with a sudden realization that you were only living one of the many lives to come. That's what I hope for, anyway. Because it sure seems a waste to spend all this time learning and then have nothing to show for it, and just cease to exist. What did I see in Coventry, UK? I was looking at a plane in the sky with my mom at about 4 or 5 in the afternoon when I noticed something weird. It looked like a white ball of light. It wasn't as bright as the sun, but it was still very noticeable. The strange part was that it appeared next to the plane. It wasn't orbiting it at all, it was just close to the plane. And it wasn't like a typical light or any sort of object I've ever seen before. It appeared, it shook violently in one spot for a second, kind of like it was charging up, and then it teleported to another spot near the plane. This happened a few times, and it seemed like the ball was following the plane, just hopping from one spot to another all around it. The whole thing lasted about 30 seconds, but each time the ball appeared, it stayed in one spot for just a moment, and then zipped to another spot in a way that felt like it was teleporting. The plane hadn't moved much at all, but the ball moved around it as if it was scanning the plane. My mom and I both saw it. I was about 6 or 7 years old at the time, and I'm 31 now. I can't explain it, and I've never seen anything like it ever since. Has anyone here ever experienced something similar, or know what this could have been? I can't figure out what I heard. Hey everyone, hoping that someone can help me figure this out with a logical explanation. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment. I was working on my desk in the living room, and I went to use the washroom, and I came out and was casually humming a song while walking through the kitchen. It's probably golden. Out of nowhere, I heard a single loud clap, or like balloon pop, sound right behind me. It was sharp and sudden, and it definitely came from nearby, like within a few feet of me. I stopped, I turned, and it was nothing. I immediately checked everything. I didn't see any balloons, nothing had fallen, there were no broken items around me, nothing out of place in the kitchen cabinets either. Even the refrigerator and the sink, I looked there too. Everything seemed fine. I looked around for a while, trying to find any logical cause, but I couldn't. I just wanted to find out where this sound came from and what it was. But everything was exactly where it should be. My apartment is tiny, and I don't have much stuff, and I'm familiar with all of the usual, house noises. But this was different. It sounded deliberate, almost like a hand clap or, again, a very close balloon pop. There were no burning smells, the lights didn't flicker or anything, and there were no sounds before or after. And it hasn't happened again. Well, yet, I should say. But it's kind of messing with my head. Any ideas on what this could be? I've read about exploding head syndrome, but I don't have a headache, and I feel fine otherwise. I would genuinely appreciate any insights. Thank you. Somebody in the comments replies, I've had this happen to me a few times. I finally found out what causes it a few months back. I buy this particular iced tea in plastic bottles. Once I'd finish one, I'd crumple up the bottle and I'd put the cap back on and I'd throw it away. After a while though, I guess the bottle would expand a bit and one of the crumpled zones would make a loud pop as it reformed. I only discovered it when the bin was nearly full and it popped while I was standing next to it, cooking. Do you think this is what's happening with you? OP responds with, so I had a crumpled bottle inside the fridge, half full with water. I just checked it and it doesn't seem to be crumpled anymore. So I think, bingo, that's it. Thank you for commenting this, otherwise I'd be spiraling for days. Now this glitch is considered busted, it seems, and it just goes to show that as many times as we would like some sort of parallel dimension, timeline hopping explanation, sometimes there really is a very real-world explanation for some of these things, whether we know it or not. And part of the fun here, this is just me talking, is figuring out if the explanation is, supernatural, paranormal, glitchy, or if it's just a water bottle in your fridge repressurizing. A strange sound that nobody else can hear. For the longest time ever, I've been hearing this beep kind of sound, and it's the same every time, and it sounds like some sort of digital camera powering on. Sometimes it could be really loud, or it can be muffled and quiet. It had been really bothering me since I didn't know what it was, so I started noting down the day and the time that I would hear it to see if there was some sort of pattern that I could find, extrapolate some data. But there wasn't. It seemed to be totally random. I've even flipped my room upside down trying to find the source of it, but I'm completely helpless now. It's genuinely taking over my life, and I don't know what it could be. I've tested everything. the sounds of all of my devices, trying to find a match, but nothing comes close. I've even heard it once at a friend's house, and she said that she didn't hear anything when I pointed it out. If I hear it in a day, it'll only ever be once, and I've never heard it repetitively in one day. Am I going insane? I've never heard anything else, and I could never find the source. Somebody in the comments shares what could solve this entire mystery. They ask, "Do you have any implanted devices?" Because my dad asked me to come stay with him and my mom, he was worried that she was having hallucinations and getting agitated. I got to their house and she tells me there's a beep that she can hear and nobody else can, just like your story. I stayed there for 5 days, and every so often she would hear the beep, but nobody else would. I went to give her a hug one day when I was getting ready to leave, and lo and behold, I hear a small beep. It's small and faint, but it's most definitely a beeping sound, and it was coming from her. It turns out, her pacemaker battery needed to be replaced. It would only go off when she was in proximity to the base station, and my dad had lost that range of hearing, so he could never hear it. I don't know if this solved your mystery, but it solved ours. OP has yet to respond to this comment. I cannot for the life of me figure this out. So here's the thing. Every Sunday, I make guacamole. It's my little ritual, and every time I use exactly half of a lime. Just half. I squeeze it in, I mix everything, and I put the other half back in the fridge for later. This Sunday was no different. I made my guac, I used half of a lime, and I left the other half in the fridge. Easy. Then, on Wednesday, I decided to make another guacamole because my sister hadn't eaten her avocado yet, and I didn't want it to go bad. I asked her if I could use it, and she said yes, and I remembered thinking, perfect, I still have that other half of a lime from Sunday. So I grab it, I squeeze it in, I eat, and I chill. Everything's normal until today, which is Thursday. I open the fridge to grab my yogurt, and boom, another half of a lime is just sitting there, the same spot, the same size, super fresh. Now, that wouldn't be weird if somebody else in the house actually used limes, but nobody does. My mom and sister don't even touch limes. The only citrus we ever use is lemon, and that's only when we bake stuff like lemon cakes, which we haven't done in weeks because Mom's on a diet. So now I'm like, what? Because I swear I used that last half yesterday. And just to be sure, I even checked the trash, and I confirmed the 2 old lime halves are still there. Both of them are the top parts, you know, the ones without the little stem hole. But the one in my fridge right now is clearly the bottom half, the side where the stem connects to the tree. That makes no sense, because somehow I now have 3 halves of 1 lime, and the new one looks freshly cut. Like, who cut it? Where did it come from? I'm honestly just questioning reality at this point. Either I accidentally discovered lime duplication, or the Matrix just glitched right inside my fridge. I'm posting this here because stuff like this never happens to me, and I still can't explain it, and I really just need to talk about it. So a couple of days ago, I was lying in bed, when I heard a whole bunch of coyotes outside howling. So I went outside to listen, and then I went right back inside when I realized how close they were. They were just across the road from me, behind some trees. When I went back to my room, all I could hear were all of the dogs in the area barking. I couldn't hear the coyotes anymore, which I thought was weird, so, of course, I went back out, and when I opened the front door, I instantly got hit with this horrible smell that I've never smelled before. If I had to guess what death smelled like, it would be that. It was also dead silent now at that point. I couldn't even hear crickets or anything in the woods making noise. I also started to feel very sick and nauseous, and my head started to feel this immense pressure, kind of like a migraine. I'm not sure if it was from the smell, but it was so bad. I had to go back inside and lay down. When I was in my room, I could hear the dogs in the area barking again. How come I could hear them when I was laying down in my room, but when I went to go investigate, it was dead quiet? I don't get it. Grab your jacket. We're going to the No Way Files. On June 30, 1908, at dawn in a remote corner of Siberia, something exploded in the sky, and the blast from that explosion flattened 2,000 square kilometers of forest. Witnesses hundreds of kilometers away felt their windows shatter, but no crater was ever found. To this day, scientists debate what exactly hit Siberia that morning and why. At roughly 7:15 a.m., a colossal explosion ripped through the air above the Podkamennaya-Tunguska River region in what is now Krasnoyarsk Krai in Russia. The force is estimated at 5 to 15 megatons of TNT, similar to a large thermonuclear bomb. The trees even snapped radially outward. Animals were thrown, and the shockwave circled the earth 2 times over. Despite the destruction, though, no impact crater ever appeared. There was never any cavity in the ground, and that absence itself haunted subsequent investigators. Eyewitness accounts came mostly from the native Evenki tribes and the Russian settlers living tens to over 100 kilometers away. They reported this bright fireball, this rumbling thunder, and then the tremors, and a fallout of odd smells or dust. And some said that their houses began to shake violently as it was happening. One Evenki chieftain, Kiro Florensky, described seeing a, quote, pillar of blue light ascending like a flame into the sky. The first organized expedition arrived 19 years later in 1927. It was led by a Russian mineralogist, Leonid Kulik. He trekked into the devastated zone, counting fallen trees and interviewing survivors. He found scorch marks, but no meteor fragments of any appreciable size, at least. He pressed forward, and the mystery deepened. Later expeditions did find microscopic dust, silica, and trace iridium in the soil, but nothing like a solid meteorite like you might expect. As of now, the leading theory is an exploding asteroid or a comet, one that detonated in midair, maybe 5 to 10 kilometers above ground, and then it disintegrated before leaving a crater. The energy that was released was immense, but the body itself left little solid remnants. Alternate theories have ranged from antimatter, black hole passages, Tesla experiments, alien crafts, but, not many of those hold water under any scrutiny right now. The airburst model, as mentioned before, remains the strongest theory. Now, many people ask, why was there no crater? If something hit Earth that hard and messed up that much amount of land, why was there no impact? That answer is likely because the object probably exploded in midair before hitting the ground. The air itself did much of the damage. Trees went horizontally outwards, and they weren't crushed straight down. Radiation measurements later showed no abnormal fallout, making exotic claims that much less credible. Some locals reported peculiar, how you say that word is peculiar, effects. Their compasses behaved erratically. Odd electromagnetic flashes were seen, and the explosion was so loud it reverberated over 500 kilometers away. Scientists found melted silica, burned resin in trees, and small glassy particles, all of which are consistent with extremely high temperatures and energetic shock waves. Those clues can help bridge science with mystery, giving credence to a cosmic explosion that wasn't fully captured by physics of the time. This was over 100 years ago, mind you. Now, seismographs in Potsdam, Germany, picked up tremors. On top of that, atmospheric pressure waves were recorded as far away as England. The blast shock wave traveled around the globe. Waves in the atmosphere made barometers fluctuate globally. Wildfires erupted in the explosion zone, birds dropped from the air, and odd tropospheric rays and auroras intensified. The Siberian forest was cleared, but the ecosystem struggled to recover. In today's day, on Reddit, readers share astonishment. They ask, how could an explosion that massive leave no crater? How could world-class scientists be so confounded? Some speculate that we're simply underestimating a cosmic threat. Others discuss whether we'd even detect such an event today before the disaster struck. One commenter noted, "You see bombs and craters. Tunguska is just absence. It's destruction without a body." That sense of awe reflects how the event still lingers today. Here's what's happened so far. A cosmic object, whether an asteroid or a fragment of a comet, enters our atmosphere. It likely detonates midair, releasing tremendous energy. It flattens the trees. Shock waves radiate out. But there's no physical core. There's no crater. Only evidence in twisted forests, burned soils, and tiny molten particles. Objects of modest size can, under the right conditions, carry destructive force. Near-Earth asteroids pass undetected. Our planet is crazy vulnerable. The event also marks the limits of the early 20th century science. The instruments that they were using to collect the data and everything else were crude. We didn't have satellite data. We didn't have global monitoring of every small asteroid. Tunguska was humbling these scientists. It forced new models for airburst, cosmic hazard assessment, and planetary defense. 2,000 square kilometers flat. Hundreds of millions of trees snapped. A globe-shaking explosion without an impact wound. It just kind of makes you want to say, no way. 21st century researchers are still hiking the Siberian taiga today, digging for clues. They root through melted silica and resonant shock waves, trying to answer one simple question. How does a skyborne rock vanish like this? Tunguska holds the paradox, and that is a disaster that felt planetary, yet left no singular wound. In that gap that sits between explosion and trace lies the space where mysterious possibility still dwells. The next time you see a bright meteor in the twilight, remember Tunguska. Can objects really reappear out of nowhere like this? This person says yes, and here's their story. I've had this backpack for about 7 years now. It's an Osprey Farpoint 40-liter. It's the kind that's been with me across airports, hostels, and border crossings. It's built tough. It's got 2 zippers that run all the way down each side, so it opens flat like a suitcase. About a year ago, I noticed that one of the zipper pulls, the small black plastic tab threaded through the metal zip, had gone missing. I have no idea when or where it happened, but it was gone. It honestly just annoyed me more than I'd like to admit. Without that pull, the zipper on that side was just harder to grab, so I just started keeping it parked in the corner, and I used the other one to open and close the bag. The problem was, though, that meant that I couldn't just crack the bag open at the top anymore. I had to unzip the whole thing every time from one side all the way to the other. And if I didn't put it down on the floor first, everything would spill out. That zipper had been like that for over a year. Then, last weekend, I took the bag on a trip, and when I went to open it, there it was. The missing zipper pull. It was perfectly intact, and it was threaded neatly through the loop just like it was as if it came from the manufacturer, like it had never left. Now, my goal in this moment was just to find some logical reason, or any reason, for how that got there. I turned the bag over, I checked every pocket, I checked every strap, every seam, and the only, quote, plausible explanation that I could come up with was absurd. And it was that someone else, with the exact same Osprey backpack, had somehow taken their zipper pull off and swapped it onto mine without me noticing. But why would anyone do that? And when? This is the most boring glitch imaginable. There wasn't like a giant flash of light. I didn't meet my doppelganger. I don't think I jumped timelines. It's just a zipper pull that disappeared for a year and then decided to come back. But still, that shouldn't have been possible. I still can't explain what happened in those woods. It happened about 6 years ago. My friend and I were walking through the woods as the light began to fade. It was that quiet hour between sunset and night when everything kinda just turns blue, We weren't out there for anything special. We were just cutting through on our way home before it got completely dark. We were almost to the trail exit when it happened. Right by my ear, close enough that I could feel a breath, a man's voice whispers, "Hello." My friend froze mid-step and immediately said, "Did you hear that?" I said yes, but my voice was barely coming out. After that, the woods fell completely silent. We couldn't hear the wind anymore. No bugs were making any noises. Even the leaves stopped rustling. It was quiet. We started walking faster, and that's when we saw it. Behind one of the trees, half hidden in shadow, was a tall figure draped in what looked like a dark cloak. It was shaped like a person, but not quite. It was very tall, and it wasn't moving. At first, I thought it might be somebody playing a prank, maybe putting a blanket over something tall. But then it moved. It darted from one tree to another. The cloak was rippling as it passed through the gaps in the branches. The footsteps didn't have any sound, though. We couldn't hear any twigs snapping. All that my friend and I can hear is just that silent, gliding motion that makes my stomach drop. That's when we started running. And whatever it was, It moved faster too. Every time I glanced back at it, it was closer, weaving through the trees like it didn't even have to touch the ground. The shape looked almost like a monk, something you'd see in an old painting or something, but it didn't have a face, just this dark, empty hood. All we wanted to do in that moment was get out of those woods alive. When we finally burst through the trees and into the open field near the trailhead, we didn't stop until we reached the edge of the parking lot. That's when I made the mistake of looking back. At the tree line, we could see that the figure had stopped. It slowly reached up and it pulled the hood even farther over its head, like it didn't want us to see. Then it turned around and just started floating back into the woods until it eventually vanished into the dark. When we got home, nobody believed us. They laughed. They said it was the wind or a trick of the shadows or something. But my friend and I, we knew what we'd seen. Now, a week later, we went back to that same spot. This time, there was nothing. We didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. And to this day, we still don't know what that thing was. We don't know if it was, a ghost, or trick of the light, or something else entirely. I'm especially bummed out because I'll never get to ask my friend what he remembers from it. He passed away about a year later. And now I'm the only one who ever saw it. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, I still think that I could hear a man's voice whisper, "Hello." Something really unnerving happened 2 nights ago. So, I went to bed at around 1 a.m., and as I was drifting off to sleep, I start seeing this being lying in front of me. I clearly see this misty white face. I just didn't recognize who it was. It then began to start sucking my essence out. I don't know how to describe it, but it siphoned this white, snow-like something out of me. I saw and physically felt it flowing from within me to outside of my mouth, and this being was just floating over me, absorbing it. I suddenly jolted awake from this almost sleep state, and it was still there. I could still see and physically feel my energy being absorbed by this thing. A few seconds into me being awake, it started to phase. It had this facial expression now, as if it was suddenly panicked that I could see it and realize that it was there. Whatever it was, it stopped and then disappeared. I feel very drained, even today. Like my body is just missing something. Like you took 5 kilograms or, almost 11 pounds of something out of me. I can feel lighter, weaker, and emptier? I don't know how to describe it, but it's weird. It didn't feel like a hostile entity. It felt like it didn't want me to know that it was there or what it was doing. Do you think it was feeding on me? Do you think it was from another dimension or some other timeline where this is normal? Or are we living in the timeline where this is in fact normal, but nobody knows? I now have a new reason to be afraid of escalators. It happened just yesterday at our local mall. My mom and I were heading toward the escalator that goes up to the 2nd floor. It was mid-afternoon, probably 2 p.m., when the place is usually packed. We were about to step on when I noticed a man and his wife coming in from the side about to cut in front of us. I slowed down to let them go first, but then they slowed too, and they smiled at us like they were going to let us go. We have that sort of awkward, polite body shuffle where one of us encourages the other one to go on. Anyway, Mom steps on first, and she gets on the right side of the step, and I step on to the stair below her just to the left. So together, we are now blocking the full width of the escalator. From the corner of my eye, I could see the man and his wife close behind us, much closer than normal. You know that prickly feeling when somebody's uncomfortably close to you, especially from behind? I had that the entire time. About halfway up, I leaned toward my mom and I said, "Hey, step in front of me to the left here, let these guys pass." And then as soon as she shifted to the left, allowing space on the right for this couple to go up, that prickly feeling goes away. The air behind us now feels, empty. My mom and I both instinctively turn around, and now we're frozen because nobody was there. We were now the only two people on the escalator. In that moment, I just wanted to understand where these people went. I wanted to make sense of how two fully grown adult people could disappear in the span of probably less than a second. At first, we tried to reason it out. Maybe they never got on. But no, that didn't make sense. I'd seen their shadows in my periph the entire time, and my mom said that she could feel someone standing behind her as well. It was indeed an unmistakable sensation. Even stranger, this was a busy mall. You never get an empty escalator at this hour, yet when we turned back, it was just us, floating up through silence in the middle of a crowd that all of a sudden didn't exist. When we stepped off at the top, we both just looked at each other. I asked my mom, "Did we just imagine those two people?" And then she quietly responds, "I don't think so. I could feel them standing really close to us. They were right there." We looked around, and there was no trace of that couple anywhere. Nobody who matched their shape or the kinds of clothes they were wearing. It was like they'd simply never been. To this day, neither one of us can explain this. Maybe they didn't get on at all. Maybe we both imagined it. Or maybe, for one brief moment, they slipped into another timeline. Or we did. A mirror glitch. This happened about 3 years ago, on a weekend when my parents were away celebrating their wedding anniversary. They were staying at a hotel in another city, so it was just me and my brother at home. I actually remember being excited. Weekends like that meant freedom. We could stay up late, play games, eat junk, and basically do whatever we wanted. So by Saturday night, it was around 4 a.m., and my brother had already gone to bed, and I decided that I should probably also call it a night. Before heading to sleep, I went to the bathroom. The hallway was dark, except for the faint glow from my computer monitor in the next room. I stepped inside the bathroom, I flicked the light on, and automatically looked into the mirror. And that's when I froze. In the reflection, the bathroom door was closed, but in real life, behind me, the bathroom door was wide open. For a second, I thought I was seeing things. I turned around to double check, and I saw that, no, that door was definitely open. I could even see the hallway beyond it. My heart starts to pound. I looked back at the mirror again, and the reflection hadn't changed. The door in the mirror was still closed. I wanted to shout out for my brother, but he was already asleep, and I couldn't make myself move. I just stood there, staring, too scared to even breathe. I just wanted to prove to myself that what I was seeing wasn't real, and that I wasn't losing my mind. I slowly reach out, and I pull the real door closed next to me. I can hear it click shut, but the mirror, nothing. The reflection didn't move. The door in the mirror stayed exactly the same. That was the moment that I don't think I'll ever forget. I opened the door again, and this time, the mirror finally follows. The reflection I was seeing did match what I was doing in real life. I stood there, shaking, to be honest, staring into the mirror for what felt like forever. I did not go to the bathroom that night. I just turned the lights off, I walked out, and I climbed into bed. I've tried telling people about this, my parents, my brother, and even some friends, but nobody believes me. They say I must have been tired or half asleep, but I know what I saw. It's been 3 years now, and I still think about that night. The version of the bathroom that didn't match mine. Has anyone else ever seen something like this in a mirror? I'd love to hear. Oh boy. This happened about 3 years ago, during one of our painting sessions. There were 4 of us in the studio. There was me, another student, the instructor, and this old-school academic painter. I was about 40 at the time. We had just finished the day's work, and I was putting things away. The instructor handed me this big, woven basket, the kind used for still life setups, as a prop, and asked me to put it on top of the tall closet by the wall. This basket was huge, awkward, and heavier than it looked. I had to stretch my arms up and tilt it just right so that it wouldn't slide back down. I remember rotating it, trying to find the right angle so that it would stay in place. And without realizing it, I kept shifting left as I maneuvered, inch by inch, because I was focused entirely on balancing that stupid basket. And that's when it happened. My foot caught something solid. It was the lower drawer of the closet, left open just a few inches. I tripped. But instead of instantly hitting the ground, I started to fall very slowly. For a full, drawn-out moment, time seemed to just stretch on. I remember clearly that I started yelling, "Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy," over and over, like some cartoon character bracing for disaster. I knew I was falling, but it felt like I had forever to think about it. In that bizarre moment, I was really just trying to brace myself and somehow stop the fall before I hit the ground. The other guys were just a few meters away from me, chatting casually. I could hear them talking even as I was mid-fall. They turned toward me only after I'd already been yelling for several seconds, which should have been too late, but somehow it wasn't. By the time I was just about to tip forward completely, they both reached me at the exact same time, one grabbing each arm, and they stopped me from hitting the floor. I didn't make any sense. There's no way that they could have reacted that fast unless I actually was falling in slow motion. But I wasn't imagining it. I felt every stretched out second, every inch of that strange, drawn-out descent. We all stood there afterward, just stunned. I think they knew something weird had just happened, too. They looked at me like they'd just witnessed a glitch in reality, like we'd all somehow stepped out of normal time for a few seconds. And sure, It was funny, but also deeply unsettling. To this day, I can still hear myself yelling, "Oh boy," again and again in a fall that shouldn't have lasted long enough to even say it once. I think the simulation is slipping. I've read plenty of glitch in the Matrix stories before. I never thought I'd have one of my own until today. My wife and I live in a small apartment right behind my parents' house. In front of both houses, there's a shared courtyard where we park our cars. The space narrows near our private gate, the one that leads directly to our door, and there's only enough room for one car to move at a time. If my wife's car is parked there, it completely blocks the way. There's no blind spots, and there's no chance of missing it. That detail matters. So here's the timeline. At 1:39 in the afternoon, I grab a basket of laundry and I head to the little laundry house, which sits off to the side of the courtyard. The outdoor camera catches me leaving. It's pointed at our doorway, so it doesn't show the gate or parking area, just me walking out of the door with the basket of laundry. 3 minutes later, at 1:42, my wife comes home with our 10-month-old daughter. The same camera records her walking from the direction of the gate and entering into the apartment, which means, logically, she's already parked her car, taken the baby out, and crossed the yard. 3 more minutes later, at 1:45, I return from the laundry room. I pass in front of the camera, and I walk straight to the gate to leave for work. I open it, I step out, and I freeze. The courtyard is empty. Her car isn't there. But it should have been parked right in front of me, blocking my path like always. Instead, there's nothing but my own car sitting farther out toward the street. Now, all I wanted to do was get to work on time, so I didn't stop to question it. I just noted how strange it was, walked out to my car, and left. Minutes later, while I'm driving, my phone buzzes. It's a photo from my wife. Our daughter is asleep in her crib. Oh, so cute. I assume it's from a photo that she had taken earlier that morning, or maybe a leftover from a nap before lunch, so I reply, "Did she sleep long?" And her answer makes my stomach twist. She says, "No, she stayed asleep after I got home. I carried her in from the car still sleeping." So I text back, I say, "Wait, when did you get home?" My wife says, "Just before you left. I thought it was weird that you didn't come back in to say hi or give us a kiss or anything." When I got home that evening, I checked the security footage again, convinced that I must have mixed something up. But there it was, plain as day. 1:39, me leaving with laundry. 1:42, wife enters the apartment. 1:43, me walking past the door and heading to my car. Perfect synced timestamps. The Wi-Fi camera clock doesn't drift. There's never any overlap, there's no delays, and all of the footage is there. And yet, the impossible part remains. When I stepped into the courtyard at 1:45, my wife's car simply was not there. That space is too narrow for both cars to move at once, and she said she parked her car in her usual spot. She even remembers seeing my car still there when she arrived, but when I left, her car was gone, vanished for those 3 minutes. I spent all day replaying the footage and second-guessing myself. If it were, some sort of glitchy recording, I could accept that. If it were just a bad memory cache or something, fine. But the timestamps and the layout don't lie. It's like for a few minutes, reality just didn't sync up correctly, and her car simply wasn't rendered yet. A morning glitch in the galley. I've worked on ships and tugboats since I was 18. I'm 31 now, so I've heard just about every superstition that can exist on the water. Sailors are full of them. You know, don't whistle on deck, never rename a boat, don't start a voyage on a Friday. But none of those rules could explain what happened to me this morning. My alarm goes off at 0700. I was already late for watch, so I jumped out of bed, put my clothes on, and headed straight for the galley. I grabbed a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch from the... Yes, I love cereal so much, dude. Heck yes. Cool. I grabbed a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch from the pantry and a can of Celsius from the fridge. The best breakfast ever, man. I set them both on the counter. Bowl, cereal, milk, the morning routine. I poured myself a full bowl. I splashed the milk on top and grabbed everything, cereal in one hand, Celsius in the other, and I turned toward the table. And that's when I noticed the whiteboard hanging nearby. We had a $20 football pool going for the 0930 game, set to start in just a couple of hours. I set my bowl down for a second, I grabbed the dry erase marker and scribbled my name under the team that I figured would win. Then I turned back, I opened the silverware drawer, and I saw 3 spoons inside. I picked one up from the back. I always skip that weird shaped one that stays up front. I hate that one. Then I closed the drawer and I sat down. All I wanted to do was eat my cereal and drink my drink before I started watch. As I sat though, I felt something brush lightly against my collarbone. It's like a faint tickle or a thread of hair or something. And then I hear the sound of metal clashing, ting, ting, ting. A spoon had dropped out of nowhere, and it landed right on the table, just inches from my bowl of cereal. I froze. Then I stood up so fast, my chair scrapes backwards. I picked up the spoon, and I just stare at it. My brain immediately goes into overdrive, trying to replay every second since I'd woken up. Had I somehow grabbed 2 spoons from the drawer without realizing it? No, that didn't make any sense. I'd only felt one in my hand. I opened the drawer again to see how many spoons were left, and there were still 2 spoons left. So where the heck did this third one come from? I stood there in just complete silence, staring at it like it might vanish again. Then I sat down, slowly, spoon in one hand, bowl in front of me, and I just ate my Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Each crunch sounded absurdly loud in that quiet galley. And somewhere between bites, I had texted my wife what happened, and she replies almost immediately. She says, "Maybe try thinking about a big pile of cash next time to see if that works." I laughed out loud at that. But even now, I keep picturing that spoon, the way it just appeared in midair, kind of like it had just slipped through a crack in whatever's holding the world together. A glitch in Hawaii. It was 2012. I'd been traveling for months, backpacking, sleeping in the woods, drifting from place to place, and by January, I'd landed on Maui. I'd been there for about 6 weeks, living cheap and moving constantly, chasing that mix of freedom and fatigue that comes from not staying anywhere long enough to really belong. The night that this happened, it was already dark. I had boarded the bus heading back toward the spot where I'd pitched my tent near the coast. The fluorescent lights inside the bus buzzed faintly overhead. They were too bright, and they were making everybody look all washed out. I found a seat, I put my backpack by my feet, and I tried to ignore the light drilling itself right into my corneas. At the next stop, an old deadhead climbed aboard. And if you don't know what that is, he owned a record shop in 1978 probably. He's jolly. He's got a long gray ponytail, and of course, a Grateful Dead t-shirt. He gave off this harmless warmth, and I remember thinking that he looked perfectly in place, even in that tired bus full of strangers. I looked away, minding my own business, just sort of half listening to other conversations, half lost in my own thought. And the bus stopped again. The doors hissed open. I looked up, and there he was again. The same old hippie with the same smile and the same shirt was now stepping onto the bus like he hadn't already been there since the last stop. I blinked hard, thinking, well, maybe I just spaced out. But it kept happening. Every time the bus would stop, I would look back up, and there he would be, boarding through the bus door like a record skipping back to the same verse over and over again. Same guy, same body language, same expression. I just wanted to make sense of what I was seeing. I wanted to catch some logical detail that I'd missed. I started forming explanations in my head. Maybe he was just getting off at every stop as some kind of joke and then sprinting ahead to catch the same bus again? But that didn't hold up. The stops were pretty far apart, and he never looked out of breath or tired or even winded at all. And I realized I hadn't seen him get off the bus either. Admittedly, I wasn't tracking him too closely. I didn't want to stare. I didn't want to be rude. But each time I thought back, I couldn't remember him ever standing up to get off. But yet, the bus was not filling up with copies of this dude. It wasn't like he was multiplying. There was just always one. Same old man getting on. By the time my stop came, I felt pretty disoriented. Like I'd been trapped in some half-waking dream or something. I stepped off, and that warm Maui air rushes over me. And when the bus doors closed behind me, I just tried to shake it off. The lights, the man, the glitchy repetition. I never saw him again after that night. Sometimes I think about him, like I am now. He's that old deadhead with the bears on his shirt, stepping into the bus again and again. I don't know. Maybe it was a Maui thing. Maybe it's a Grateful Dead thing. Or maybe it's just a moment that slipped out of the pattern of reality for a bit and then just kept quietly sliding back in, only for me to notice. Why couldn't I see them? This happened many years ago, but I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. Back then, I was one of 4 area managers for a motor company. Once a month, we'd all meet at headquarters. It's about 380 miles from my home. We would do that for our regional meetings. The 4 of us would usually drive up the night before, meet at a hotel somewhere along the way, and then carpool the rest of the distance in the morning. The hotel was different every time. It was always whichever one made the most sense for where we were working that week. In this particular month, we met in the evening. We had dinner, had a couple of drinks, the usual bit of shop talk, and agreed to meet for a quick breakfast in the restaurant before setting off again. Everything was ordinary. The next morning, I woke up early, I packed my things, and I went down first. The restaurant was quiet, except for this low hum of just morning chatter. Coffee mugs clinking together on accident. I found a small table near the window. I ordered some coffee, and I waited. All I really wanted to do was have a quick breakfast, meet with the others, and then hit the road. A few minutes passed, and then I heard them. I heard their voices just as clear as anything. I heard them laughing, chatting, talking about work. I heard one of them say something about a client in Manchester. Another one joked about the long drive ahead. And then one of them asked, "Has anyone seen him yet?" Meaning me. Now these other area managers, they were right there. I could hear all three of them as though they were seated just behind me. But when I turned around, the room was empty. There were a few scattered business travelers here and there. A waitress was clearing some plates, but there were no sign of my colleagues. I stood up. I walked slowly through the restaurant, scanning each table. Nothing. The foyer, it was empty. The reception desk, also empty. But their voices, they weren't getting quieter. It sounded like they were following me, like I could still hear them conversing somewhere within a few feet from me. It was them. I know it. I recognized every inflection, every habit of speech. I even heard the sound of one stirring his tea. You know, that small, clinking rhythm that I'd heard 100 times in previous meetings. I went back to my table. I sat down and I'm just now trying to act normal. But the voices were still going. They were debating the route that we'd take and complaining about motorway traffic. And then one said, "I'll go check on him. Maybe he overslept." And that made my stomach drop. I should have gone right then. Stood up, walked to my room, broken whatever spell was happening, but I didn't. I just sat there, paralyzed, kind of frozen in midair. A minute later, I heard one of them say, "He's not there. He must have already left?" And then came the sound of chairs scraping, footsteps leaving, and this murmur fading toward the exit door, and then finally, silence. I sat there for another moment, my coffee now cold, my heart thudding in my chest. And when I finally walked out to the car park, one of their cars was already gone. I got into mine, still dazed, and I drove to the meeting. The entire drive there, I was replaying that over and over in my head. Their voices, the way they were speaking about me in real time, as if I were somewhere else entirely. When I arrived, they were all there, laughing, eating some snacks, acting normal, and then I told them what had happened. I told them that I'd heard them in the restaurant, even though they weren't there. They stared at me, kind of half smiling, half concerned, and one said, "I don't know, man, you probably just dreamt it." And then another one laughed it off, and the conversation continued. But I know what I heard. I know. To this day, I can still hear their voices echoing faintly in my memory. It was just the sound of them existing in a place that I couldn't see, and I also couldn't be seen. Sometimes if you look up, you'll find something that'll make you say, "No way." In the remote Norwegian valley, a strange glow appears in the night sky, sometimes hovering, sometimes racing around, and sometimes vanishing in midair. The locals there call it the Hesdalen lights. Scientists still don't have a definitive explanation for what's going on here. What's causing these orbs in the night? Well, let's talk about it. The Valley of Hesdalen sits in central Norway in Trøndelag County. It's small, it's quiet, and it's got steep sides and a narrow floor. Starting at least in the 1930s, and more visibly from December of 1981, residents began seeing unexplained lights floating above or moving through the valley. In the early 80s, the sightings started to sharply increase. Between December of 1981 and mid-1984, observers counted 15 to 20 events per week during its peak. So what do they look like? Well, witnesses describe glowing spheres or orbs. Colors can range from white to yellow to even red, and they appear above ground, sometimes below horizon and sometimes over the hillsides. Some of them hover for several minutes at a time, while others rush across the sky at high speeds. One photo sequence caught a red blinking light making 3 180-degree turns over 55 minutes. Occasionally, the orbs appear in groups. Some reports claim they see a triangular formation. Others capture a long streak and then a halt, like it had just landed somewhere. The variability here only deepens the mystery. Because of the frequency and the odd behavior of these lights, in 1983, the investigation group known as Project Hessdalen was founded. Led by Norwegian engineers and supported by the military between 83 and 85, the goal was simple. They wanted to measure these things, capture these things, and explain them. In August of 98, more than 10 years later now, an automated station, it's known as the Hessdalen Automatic Measurement Station, or some people just call it the Blue Box, was placed in the valley. It's got cameras, magnetometers, and weather sensors, and it's continuously monitoring the sky. Well, what did that blue box find? Data shows the lights correlate sometimes with magnetic anomalies or radio spikes, and sometimes radar echoes. A long-term survey noted that lights react to atmospheric conditions, but there's no single model that explains them all. We only know a few facts, and those are: lights sometimes reflect radar signals. Some produce spectrographic signatures that kind of resembles plasma, and many appear in winter, during the nighttime, and under clear skies. But we still don't know what's powering these things. Why are they localized to just Hessdalen? And why are all of their patterns so irregular? Well, there's a few theories on the table here. One is called the dust plasma model. Ionized dust particles in air create light orbs by interacting with electric fields. A model ties this to local radon decay and charged dust. Now, there's a second theory as well. This one's the piezoelectric effect. And that one goes on to say that stress in quartz-rich rock under strain generates electricity and light. Now, the valley's geology includes quartz and other mineral deposits, and when rock is stressed, it may produce charges. Another theory is that it's purely extraterrestrial or UFO related. Because no firm explanation exists, some suggest aliens, right? Or some sort of unknown futuristic technology. This idea is popular online, but it lacks evidence. Let's just put it that way. However, none of these theories, though, can satisfy all of the observations. The valley remains a natural laboratory and mystery. Now, you might be wondering, what do the locals say? Well, according to some Reddit threads and some visitor reports, the people that live in Hessdalen describe the lights as unnerving. Surprise, surprise. One posted, "You see a ball of light that drifts over a mountain and then stops and then disappears like nothing you've ever seen." Other locals point out that there are plenty of hoaxes going on. They could be misidentifications of car headlights or simple aircraft flying through. But in Hessdalen, what stands out is the regularity and the measurement of the phenomena. That is what pushes it beyond just the campfire story into something maybe much more serious. So what's been measured so far? Well, In the early 2000s, the EMBLA project deployed spectrometers and radio receivers focusing on UHF and VLF and ELF bands. They discovered strong radio signals and magnetic field disturbances at the time of the sightings. Now, the blue box records daily optical events and logs them for study. Although today sightings average only about 10 to 20 per year, which is far less than the 1980s peak, the data is still coming in. And what that data confirms is that something real is happening in that valley, even today. It isn't always, super dramatic or life-changing. Well, maybe it is, but not yet. Sometimes it's brief, sometimes it's irregular, but it is always persistent and it is always measurable. In an age of satellites and global monitoring, we still have a place where glowing orbs evade full explanation. Still to this day, nobody knows what these things are. And those things matter because it reminds us that science doesn't have all of the answers. Scientists and researchers and laboratories are working overtime to learn as much as they can about the world we live in, but we're not there yet. It also offers a natural phenomenon that crosses across several categories, including geology, atmospheric physics, maybe something else. It also attracts researchers and tourists and technology alike. It combines this sense of wonder and study and speculation. It just makes it fun. In the stillness of that Norwegian valley, under a sky that should be silent and empty, these lights keep happening. Sometimes they're hovering above the hillsides, other times they streak across the entire sky from one side to the other and then vanish. Researchers watch, sensors record, and the theories are birthed, but no consensus emerges. Hessdalen reminds me, and hopefully you, that even in our most remote spaces, like this valley in Norway, the natural world still holds surprises. And if you ever find yourself under that northern sky, waiting in the cold for something to flicker in the dark, you'll know that some mysteries are not meant to be solved this easily. They're simply meant to be witnessed. My dog and I both experienced a glitch today. My wife wasn't expected home until about 6 p.m., so when her work van pulled into the driveway at 5:30, my dog and I perked up. At first, the reaction was normal. The dog wagged her tail, started spinning in circles, and whining like she always did when Mama came home early. But then, in the middle of one of her twirls, she froze, her body stiffened, and she barked. Something was off. I stood at the window, peeking through the narrow slit in the blinds, and sure enough, I saw my wife's white van angled in the driveway. Engine was still ticking from the cold. She gets out, walks to the mailbox, she pulls out a few letters. The motion is so familiar, it barely registered at first. Then she started up the path toward the door. And then, she didn't. She never reached the door. The space between the mailbox and the porch was only a few steps, but somewhere in that short distance, she vanished. The dog is now growling and pacing, and I could feel my stomach turning cold. I just wanted to confirm what I thought I had just seen, and I wanted to make sure my wife was okay. I pulled up the security camera feed on my phone, the one aimed directly at the driveway and the front walk. I rewound it by 30 seconds, and I watched closely. Nothing. No van pulled up in the footage. No woman walked to the mailbox. There was no movement triggered at all. It was just the same empty driveway that it had been for most of the day. I texted my wife immediately. I asked, "Hey, are you home already?" A few seconds later, she texts back saying, "No, gonna be a little later than normal. I'm about 45 minutes away. Why?" I stared at the screen. My pulse is pounding. The dog was still restless, pacing between the door and the window, like she couldn't decide whether to guard or hide. When my wife finally did come home, right on schedule at about 6:15, everything played out the same way again. My dog and I heard the sound of the tires coming up the gravel, the shape of the van in the driveway. She gets out and walks to the mailbox, the letters in hand, and then she turns to walk toward the door. Our dog now launches into that same happy dance again, but this time there was no freezing, no barking. And through that same slit in the blinds, I watched her walk up the path, reach for the door handle, and open the door. And there she was, stepping into the house like nothing unusual had happened. Deja vu doesn't explain this one. It was the same sequence of events 2 times, once from somewhere else, kind of like a preview of a moment that hadn't happened yet. Even now, I don't know what to call it. A glitch in the Matrix, maybe? Or a brief overlap in timelines? One where she arrived early and one where she didn't? All I know is that my dog saw her too, and whatever version came first never made it to the door. Hey, between me and you, that whole time I was reading that story, I was just thinking, dude, get up. Go outside and look for your wife, man. I mean, I don't know if he was just injured or something, but there's plenty of comments asking if he just dreamed about his wife showing up early, which he denies. There's comments mentioning Vardogers, which are basically spirits that kind of mimic a loved one to warn you of their impending arrival, I guess. They're pretty harmless for the most part. And other things, but not a single person was like, why didn't you go outside? I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments about that one. What just happened to me and my boyfriend? This happened less than an hour ago, and I still feel a chill just thinking about it. My boyfriend and I are both sitting here trying to make sense of something that shouldn't be possible. We sleep in a small camper parked in my dad's driveway. It's cozy, it's a little cramped, and it's just enough space for the 2 of us. My dad and his close friend live in the main house, and all of our clothes are kept inside in our separate room. We've never kept clothes in the camper, ever. Earlier tonight, before heading out to bed, we layered up. We had jackets and socks, you know, the usual. It's been getting cold lately, so before we headed out to the camper, we layered up. Shirts, sweaters, jackets, all of it. My boyfriend was wearing a yellow t-shirt under a black button-up shirt. I remember that clearly because when we climbed into bed, I helped him take the button-up shirt off, leaving him in just the yellow shirt. We watched a show, we cuddled, and so on. At one point, he pulled his yellow shirt off and tossed it to the floor beside my nightstand. I watched him do it. Now, this was nothing unusual, but then, maybe 45 minutes later, we decided to head inside to use the bathroom before really falling asleep. And that's when it started. My boyfriend stood up, reached for the shirt that he'd thrown down, and it wasn't there. At first, it was funny. He laughed, thinking that it must have just slid underneath something. But that laughter quickly faded. He tore the place apart. He shook out all the blankets. He lifted the pillows, checked the shelves and the cabinets, even under the bed. No yellow shirt. All he wanted to do was just find this yellow shirt to put it back on before heading inside. it was nowhere. And then something even stranger happened. He bent down beside the bed, reached near where the shirt should have been, and he came back up holding a gray shirt. We just stared at it. It was not the one that he'd been wearing to bed. It was the one that he'd worn earlier in the day. The gray one that he'd left in our room inside the house. We'd both seen it sitting there in plain sight just 2 hours before that. We were stunned. I remember him saying, no, that's impossible, over and over again. Thinking that maybe the yellow one was still hiding somewhere, we gave up and we headed back inside, half freaked out and half determined to find it. He opened the door to our room inside the house, flipped the light on, and he called me over immediately. The yellow shirt was sitting right where the gray one had been earlier in the day, folded loosely on the same spot, as if it never moved. The two shirts had switched places, and we hadn't left the camper since getting into bed. The room in the house was locked, and no one could have gone in or out without us knowing. The yellow shirt, the one that I watched him wear, touch, and then toss on the floor beside me, was now inside the house, and the gray shirt, the one that should have been inside, had somehow appeared in the camper. We're both completely sure of what we saw, what he wore, and where each shirt had been. There's no trick of the memory or like a mix-up here, just a genuine, impossible swap. I've searched the internet for hours, but nothing comes close to explaining it. How can two objects, two ordinary shirts, switch exact places across separate spaces without ever being seen or touched? And maybe even more importantly, why did that happen? I swallowed something from another timeline. It still makes my skin crawl to think about this, partly because it's so small and stupid, and partly because it should not be possible. This all started back in the summer of 2017. I was working at a dog kennel that summer. The hours were long, the floors were wet, and the barking never really stopped. I just bought a pair of new earrings. They were just simple studs with rainbow gems that caught the sunlight. They made me feel put together, even while I was wearing scrubs and sneakers. One day, while I was walking one of the bigger dogs, the dog jumped up and headbutted me right in the ear. I felt this sharp sting, and then I heard the faint plink of something hitting the concrete. When I went to touch my ear, the gem was gone. The post was still in there, but that little rainbow gem was missing now. I crouched down to look for it, and I found it. Thankfully, it reflected the sunlight in the most colorful and beautiful way. I sighed a sigh of relief, and I put both pieces, the post and the gem, in my pocket. Figured I'd just fix it later. My goal was to keep the broken earring safe until I could repair it. After work, I emptied my pockets into my car's center console. I even remember glancing at it again before I shut the lid. A week later, I remembered the earring and I went to open the console to get it, but it was gone. It was completely missing. I searched every inch of that console. I looked under all of my receipts, in every corner. I even pulled out the lining, and nothing. I checked the floor mats, all of the seams in the seats, everywhere that it could have rolled. Eventually, I gave up, annoyed, but resigned. Over the next 2 years, I didn't think about it. I'd cleaned the car a few times. I tossed out the old trash, started vaping that winter, actually. I just lived my life. Occasionally, the gem would cross my mind. Just, a reminder of the small, stupid loss that you eventually forget about. Then came 2019. I was driving with a friend in the passenger seat, talking about, I don't know, something meaningless probably. And the afternoon light was hitting just right through the windshield. My friend said something funny, and I opened my mouth to reply, and then something fell out. I felt it leave my mouth as I opened it. It wasn't like spit or food or anything. It was a solid object. I felt it hit my lip, bounce off my chin, and then land in my lap. I instantly started to panic because I thought it was a tooth, one of my worst nightmares. You ever have dreams about your teeth falling out? Well, I thought that was happening in real life. I pulled over so fast that my friend looked at me like I'd lost it. My hands were shaking when I picked the thing up from my lap, and when I looked at it, it wasn't a tooth, thank goodness, but it was the missing gem from my earring. The rainbow stone, the same one that I'd lost 2 years ago. I'm now just staring at this rainbow stone with my heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could something that I lost in 2017, something that had disappeared from a sealed car console, by the way, fall out of my mouth in 2019? I felt it in my mouth a split second before it fell out, and I knew it wasn't there before, obviously. It wasn't lodged in my sinuses, as some people have asked. It was much too big for that. And it wasn't stuck in my vape, that would have blocked the airflow of the entire thing. And it wasn't on my lap before I felt it drop from my mouth. It came from inside me. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but that gem, the same size, same colors, even that same tiny scratch on the side from when it fell, was now sitting in my hand again. Even now, I can't explain it. Sometimes I'll catch myself looking at my reflection and touching my earlobe, remembering how that tiny rainbow stone went missing and how it somehow found its way back to me through a place that it never should have been. I randomly met the same man in 2 different German cities, and then it got weird. I don't usually post stuff like this, but something happened during my recent trip to Germany, and it's been stuck in my head ever since. I feel like I need to write it down somewhere. Maybe somebody who's listening has experienced something similar. A couple of weeks ago, I traveled to Münster to meet a close friend. One afternoon, we were chilling in a small, quiet park. It wasn't like a tourist place or anything. We were just laying on the grass when this old man, who's maybe 65 or 70, came up to us. He had green eyes, long hair, dressed normally, didn't look homeless, but something just felt off. He started speaking to us in a language that sounded German, but it wasn't. He was talking super fast and making these weird hand gestures, like a love sign, and movements that felt like he was trying to share energy or love with us. My friend whispered that we should probably just ignore him. He doesn't seem normal. So we did, and he eventually left. A few days later, we went to Berlin for a huge protest. There were like 60,000 people there. After it ended, we were laying down again in some random spot with some other people around. My friend was talking to a girl and I was on my phone. I randomly looked up and I saw the same man from the park in Münster. Same guy, same face, and he was even wearing the same clothes. I ran to my friend and I told him. We were both surprised. We approached him, but he didn't seem to recognize us. But still, he did the same thing, talking in this weird speech pattern and using the same hand signals as before. At this point, we were just confused and a little freaked out. I mean, what are the chances of running into the exact same man in a completely different city doing the exact same thing? But that's not the end of it. A couple of days later, we were in a bar, and my friend goes outside to smoke, and a man in his 40s came up to him and randomly just started a conversation. Nothing too strange. Then, 2 nights later, we were at a club, and that same man shows up again. He walked past us, said hello, and sat somewhere, not too close. About 40 minutes later, I suddenly felt somebody tapping on my shoulder. I turned around and it was that same guy, holding a pen and insisting that I take it. I told him no, it's not mine, but he kept holding it out toward me, like he really wanted me to have it. The vibe was very strange. My friend and I looked at each other and we just felt uncomfortable, so we left the club right away. Later, we kept thinking about it and wondering if these two guys were somehow connected. One kept repeating a message about love, and the other trying to give me a pen. I don't know, something about it just felt more symbolic than random. Both of them appeared twice, both in completely different places and both out of nowhere. We're still trying to process all of it, and if anyone's ever had anything like this happen, I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're open to any kind of interpretation, spiritual, logical, psychological. Honestly, we just want it to make sense. This was a story sent in by a listener to DarekWeberSubmissions at gmail.com. It comes from Mike, and we're calling it A Fish Crossing the Street. I was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, Los Angeles County. You probably know it as the land of strip malls and palm trees and eternal traffic. It's massive, it's busy, and running into someone that you know randomly, not a thing. Unless, fate is messing with you. So, about 3 years ago, I was leaving my son's house in Northridge after a regular weekday visit. It was about 3 p.m., nothing dramatic. I wasn't driving, so I was in the backseat of a Lyft, minding my own business while we coasted up to a red light at some small intersection. Now, if you've ever been stuck at a red light in the valley, you know there's not much to do other than check your phone and pretend you're not judging the playlist that your Lyft driver picked. So, naturally, I pulled out my phone and I opened up Facebook. I was just scrolling through. There's the usual chaos, birthday cakes, political rants, AI slop. Somebody was selling a used couch for $900. That's weird. Then I saw it. I saw a post from a friend as a former client that I met a few years earlier. He's a hardcore fisherman and hunter, and every so often, he blesses my timeline with a photo of whatever creature he just wrestled out of the wilderness. This time, it was a giant rainbow trout, freshly caught that morning. He looked proud, and the fish looked, mildly offended. The post said that he caught it that morning at a lake about an hour north of Northridge, a spot that I actually fished at as a kid, so it sparked a little nostalgia for me. I held my phone up, I admired the catch, and I hit like. And I kid you not, the very second I hit that like button, I lowered my phone. I looked up, and there he was. That same guy. He was crossing the street, right in front of our car, with his fishing poles still in hand. I blinked, I stared at him, I checked my phone, like Maybe it had become sentient and was now predicting people's locations in real time? But no, there he was, just casually strolling across the intersection like this was totally normal and not some Twilight Zone crossover event. I mean, it wasn't like the lake was just across the street. It was an hour north. I looked back down at my phone and I sent him a message. I said, "Hey, are you walking in Northridge right now?" And he replies almost instantly. He says, "Yeah, man. I just got back from the lake. I live around here." Now let me be very clear. I'd never been to his house. I had no clue where he lived. I didn't even know he lived anywhere near Northridge. And yet, somehow, I happened to be driven past his exact street at the exact moment that he was walking across it, right after I liked a photo of him from an hour away. I mean, seriously. The odds of that happening have to be in the same ballpark as winning the lottery while being struck by lightning inside of a shark. To this day, I still can't believe it. I think about that moment pretty often. Not only was it incredibly strange, but it was just so perfect in its weirdness. And you know what's funny? Whenever I remember it, I don't picture the fish that he caught. I picture the fish crossing the street. Thanks for your time. Love the channel. Keep it up. Here's another email submission from Andres. The email starts with, "Hello, Mr. Rainy Voice." You know what? Literally 2 days ago, I was thinking about the rain. You know, do I keep it? Do I turn it up? Do I get rid of it? I've been using it for so long now, I'm either at the point where now I could never change it, or I should change it. And I was just kind of, internally battling that idea. But, since Andre started his email with "Hello, Mr. Rainy Voice," maybe that's a sign I keep it. Anyway, he goes on. "I have a personal Mandela effect story that I've not told anyone yet, aside from my immediate circle of friends and family. If you find it interesting enough to fit it in one of your videos, I'm really wondering if anyone else has ever had the same experience. I'm from Hungary, in Eastern Europe, and I have this vivid memory from the first year of high school. One day, I was playing my then favorite World War II video game, it's called Hearts of Iron 2, when I noticed that one of the playable nations was Czechoslovakia. I was completely shocked, overcome with a sense that I could only describe as this combination of déjà vu and almost vomit-inducing anxiety. I've looked at maps of Europe for hundreds of hours through the game at that point, and also had a decent education in history, yet I could swear that there was never a country named Czechoslovakia. I remember that there was a nation identical to it, where there was a name that started with a B, but by this point I could no longer recall the, quote, original name. I even remembered that name coming up in everyday conversations, as it's pretty common for the older folks to still refer to countries by their old names, like Yugoslavia, for example. I went to check Wikipedia, and I also found references only to Czechoslovakia. I then went downstairs to the kitchen to ask my parents if they've ever heard of a country called Czechoslovakia, which, of course they did, having lived in Eastern European communism for decades. I was pale as a ghost, and my parents were dumbfounded. I told my closest friends, and up to this day, everyone looks at me like I'm crazy when I bring this story up. But I swear, I can recall the entire scene with enough details that I could draw it, if only I had the skills. Best wishes, Andres." read a story from a listener several weeks ago named Doreen, and I got an alarmingly high number of comments asking for more information and more stories from this individual, particularly regarding her Rainbow Bridge event. Well, here it is. About a year and a half ago, I had a cat named Butterscotch. She was a deep, beautiful orange cat with stripes. I rescued her off the streets. She had cancer, and I brought her inside my front room. I gave her the 2 best months of her life. She was about 12 or 13, and then she stopped eating. We had the euthanasia at home. Anyway, she was given the first shot, and you're always at that point where you start to doubt yourself and say, oh no, should I stop? Should I change my mind? But, by then, you can't. You can't simply go on extending the inevitable because your heart is breaking into a million pieces. It's just not right. You have to do what's right for the animal, and sadly, they're only here with us for so long, and we have to love them and do what we can in that short time frame. You also have to trust that there is a rainbow bridge, and you will absolutely see them again and feel them again. They'll do whatever they can to let you know that they're still with you in spirit. It's real. And that right there is the hope and the inspiration that we all need to believe in. Getting into the event. We're over by the open window in the porch, and she's on a pillow, and again, after she got the first shot, she was pretty much out of it. I had her head resting on my arm, and I looked at her and I said, "Are you sure?" And being an animal communicator along with a spiritual medium, I heard her say to me, telepathically, "Let me go." I told the doctor administering the euthanasia to give the second shot, and what happened next absolutely blew my mind. I watched something white lift out of her body and hover there for a second or two, and then went flying through the window screen out toward my shed. My dog is an American Eskimo named Coco that died 25 years ago. Well, I watched him appear. He got down on his arms, sticking his butt up in the air, wagging his tail, which he always did. He barked 3 times, which, again, he always would. And this white mass just went flying over to him, and then they both vanished up into thin air. Now, in this moment, the doctor saw me whip my head to the right, and she's like, "What just happened? What did you see?" And I told her, and she said, "I absolutely believe you, and doing this job is not easy, and I've heard so many stories like that one." Doreen goes on to say, "I asked my cat to send me a sign that she's okay and that she made it to the Rainbow Bridge." I sat down that night, mostly numb, just flipping through the TV channels. I stopped on a TV show that I don't really usually watch, but something in me just told me that I should leave it on, so I did. I'm half watching it. It was about this psycho man that invented this disease that was eating people. I don't know, something silly. He was locked up in this mental institution, and a female police officer goes to talk to him. Now, in case you've forgotten, my cat's name was Butterscotch. So as this man and this woman in the show are talking in the cafeteria of the mental institution, he just stops and stares, and she looks at him and she goes, "Are you okay?" The man then looks down at the pudding in his hand and he says, "This is butterscotch pudding. I don't like butterscotch pudding." Now, maybe it's stupid or just a coincidence, but I saw it as a sign that she did make it to the Rainbow Bridge. I mean, out of all the TV shows that I could have stopped and looked at for a few minutes, this one was the one that pulled me to it. I miss butterscotch every day, but I know that she's given me signs. I could feel her on my bed. I can sense her. Doreen goes on to ask me to let everyone know how much it hurts to lose an animal, but also to keep the faith that you'll join them again one day in spirit. There's another interesting detail that Doreen adds after we corresponded a little more. She adds, "I'm not sure if you can put pictures in a podcast, but the next day I went to work and I was pulling into a parking spot in the pouring rain, and I got out of my car and this key card was sitting on the ground. It was, at the time, an old Hilton key card that they were switching from. I guess they were not using the cards anymore, they were now using your phones, but regardless, the meaning was quite clear. On the card, it reads, 'It's time to let me go.' Another sign that I heard what I actually heard from Butterscotch." Something tied my ponytail for me when I was 5. We lived in what's called a chawl in India. It's a row of small, connected homes that shared walls and laughter and noise. Doors always open, neighbors are always in sight, and there's always kids running barefoot through these narrow lanes that kind of smelled like spice and soup. That afternoon, my mom stepped out for groceries, leaving the door cracked open to let the air in. Then a woman came in. I don't remember her face exactly, I just get this blurry impression whenever I try to think back. But she had a warm presence and soft hands, and I felt like I knew her. She wasn't a stranger. I mean, not in the way that strangers usually feel. I wasn't afraid, and there was no hesitation on either of our parts. She just somehow felt like she belonged in my house. We talked, though I couldn't tell you about what. The memory is faint, kind of dreamlike. But I do remember one thing pretty clearly. I asked her to tie up my hair. I said, "My mom never ties it into a ponytail." And then I remember her laughing, and she obliged. She brushes my hair back with her gentle fingers, and the feeling of being cared for lingered long after she tied the ponytail. She then smiles, stands back up, and then leaves through the front door. When my mom came home a little while later, the first thing she noticed was my new ponytail. "Who tied this for you?" she asked, very confused. And then I told her about the lady, how she was just somebody from the community, someone that I think I'd seen before, though I couldn't tell you from which house. I just pointed toward the row of neighbors, confident that one of them would probably confirm it for me. Now, at this point, my mom's goal was pretty simple. Find the woman who came into the house and tied up my hair. She went to the door, asking each of the 4 or 5 families who lived next to us if they had come in to help me, and every single one of them said no. We never found out who she was. The incident eventually fades with time, but never completely. And now, so many years later, after scrolling through stories of unexplainable events and impossible encounters, this is the only one from my life that still makes me pause. Because no matter how much I try to rationalize it, I can still remember the feeling of her fingers tying my hair up gently, like she'd done it 100 times before. Who was that? Every haunted object has a story. Whether it's a painting that makes you do terrible things to others, or a song that makes you do terrible things to yourself. Well, there are a few stories are as tangled, or as modern, or as contagious as the Dybbuk box. Is the Dybbuk box a real cursed object? Or some sort of a brilliant hoax? Or maybe something in the middle? You might think that the story of the Dybbuk box starts in some dark European attic, but it doesn't. It actually starts on a website called eBay. In 2003, a man named Kevin Mannis, who's a small business owner in Portland, Oregon, listed a wine cabinet for sale. His description read kind of like a horror story, though. He claimed that the box had once belonged to a Holocaust survivor who had escaped Nazi-occupied Poland. He called it a Dybbuk box, a container for a restless and malicious spirit from Jewish folklore known as a Dybbuk. According to tradition, a Dybbuk is the wandering soul of a dead person who simply refuses to move on. It can possess the living, it can spread grief and chaos until it's properly exorcised. Kevin Mannis wrote that the box came with strange contents, like 2 locks of hair tied with string, a small granite slab engraved with Hebrew letters, a dried-up rosebud, a golden wine goblet, and a candle holder with octopus-like legs. He warned potential buyers that the box was cursed, and that everyone who had owned it since its discovery had experienced nightmares, terrible smells, or a sudden onset of illness. Now, one of those buyers was Jason Haxton. He was a museum curator from Missouri. He purchased the box from eBay after reading Mannis's now famous post. According to Jason Haxton, the strange activity continued. He brought the box home, and his lights start flickering. Objects in his house would move. He and his co-workers developed unexplainable rashes and even started coughing up blood. Eventually, Haxton sealed the box in a gold-lined case and claimed to have hidden it away for safety. He later writes a book called The Dybbuk Box in 2011, and that's when this legend spreads far beyond paranormal circles on tiny corners of the internet. Soon, Hollywood gets their hands on it. Just a year later, in 2012, the Sam Raimi-produced horror film called The Possession hits theaters, and it's directly inspired by Haxton's story. The movie's release revived the real-world fascination. Paranormal investigators, YouTubers, and collectors all wanted a Dybbuk box of their own. Online, dozens of supposed, quote, Dybbuk boxes began showing up for sale, but, most of them were nothing more than just old jewelry chests sealed with wax. By the late 2010s, even Zach Baggins himself, host of Ghost Adventures, had acquired the original box from Haxton and placed it inside his haunted museum in Las Vegas. He displayed it in a glass case with warning signs and holy symbols all around it. But did anything happen when Zach had it? Well, Zach says yes. His story is in 2018, he invited, music artist Post Malone to view the box during filming. After their visit was over, Post Malone's private jet was forced to make an emergency landing, his Rolls-Royce was involved in a crash, and his old house was burglarized, all within the span of a few weeks. Fans immediately connected all of these terrible events to his visit to the Dybbuk box. Was that a coincidence, or do you think that was a consequence? The Dybbuk box itself is not new. Jewish mysticism describes it as a clinging spirit that enters the bodies of the living to complete unfinished business. Now, I didn't know what the word Dybbuk meant before I started looking into this, so I looked it up, and it comes from the Hebrew davak. I'm pronouncing that very wrong, but it means to cling or to attach. In other folklore, exorcisms were performed by rabbis who would confront the spirit directly, often reciting prayers until the spirit would eventually leave its host. These stories were mostly cautionary tales about grief or guilt, but the Dybbuk box is kind of a modern invention. There were no records in Jewish history of spirits being trapped inside wooden wine cabinets. According to historian Dr. Yoram Bilou, the legend of the Dybbuk box appears nowhere in Jewish mysticism before the year 2003, which was the same year Kevin Mannis listed his for sale. Do we think it's all made up? Well, listen to this. Kevin Mannis later admitted that the story was partly fictional. In interviews, he said the eBay listing was written like, quote, interactive fiction. It's a kind of modern folklore experiment, something like unfiction, if you're familiar with that. He wanted to see how people would react to a story that they could buy. But by then, it was far too late. The story had taken a life of its own. Collectors who purchased replicas claimed to hear scratching coming from inside their boxes. Other people reported nightmares, flickering electronics, or even intense feelings of dread. And because so many of these boxes existed, skeptics couldn't pin down a single source. Now there is a kind of scientific take that I want to share with you. Skeptics point out that psychological suggestion does play a huge role in all of this. If you're told that something is cursed, your brain might start looking for evidence to confirm that, to confirm the bias. That's called the nocebo effect. It's kind of the evil twin of the placebo effect. If a person believes an object is harmful, they may genuinely feel symptoms of harm. And sealed antique boxes can produce real-world effects too, like mold spores, volatile oils, or even chemicals from old varnish can cause headaches or nausea. That is a mundane explanation, and it's also one that doesn't make for a very viral story. Reddit threads about the Dybbuk box are a mix of fascination and frustration. Some users call it the, quote, modern cursed object myth, and others share eerie personal experiences. One Reddit comment says, I don't care if it's fake. Something about a box that can trap evil just feels wrong to open. Now, if you ask me, that's the part that keeps this legend alive here. It's the unease that maybe, belief itself can give something power. If we think it's cursed, we actually believe it's cursed and we start seeing the side effects of that. So what's inside the Dybbuk box? Most people say that it's just dust or old wine. And some people think that it's actually a restless soul that feeds on our curiosity. Either way, the box really does serve as a mirror, reflecting the human need to explain the unexplainable. If you got your hands on a Dybbuk box that was allegedly cursed, what would you do with it?